Imagine settling into a first-class seat you rightfully purchased, only to be told you don't belong. The ticket in your hand says otherwise, but the eyes around you say something else. What do you do when your dignity is questioned in front of strangers, when assumptions speak louder than truth? This is the story of Jonathan Reed, a man who carried himself with quiet strength while an entire system tried to push him out of his place. A flight attendant, a gate agent, a security officer, and even fellow passengers believed they knew who he was before he spoke a word. But what unfolded at 30,000 feet would not only change the course of that flight, it would send shockwaves through an entire airline industry. Would you have stayed calm in that moment? Could you have endured humiliation without breaking, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal who you really are? Stay with us as we dive into one of the most powerful true stories of dignity, prejudice, and transformation ever to unfold in the skies. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these powerful stories. The first-class cabin of Aerovista Airlines Flight 982 was unusually quiet that Monday morning. Soft light streamed from the overhead panels, bouncing off the polished mahogany trim around the seats. The hum of the air system blended with the faint rustle of newspapers and the muted tapping of laptop keys. Passengers sipped their coffee, checked their phones, or leaned back in plush leather seats that promised a smooth journey from New York to San Francisco. In seat 1A sat Jonathan Reed, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy suit pressed so crisply it seemed freshly tailored that morning. His tie matched the shade of midnight, his shoes polished to a mirror finish. He looked every bit the man who had long since learned how to command a room without raising his voice. Yet Jonathan wasn't trying to command anything. Not here. Not at 30,000 feet. He had boarded quietly, settled into his seat, opened his laptop, and begun reviewing quarterly figures for Ellison Global Holdings, the company he had built from a small logistics startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The spreadsheet glowed on the screen, numbers cascading into charts, but Jonathan's eyes were calm, almost meditative. He had practiced the art of concentration, the discipline of blocking out distractions, a skill learned over decades of navigating boardrooms where being both black and in power drew scrutiny he had never asked for. It was then that a shadow fell across him. "Excuse me, sir." A voice cut through the stillness. "I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and move to the back of the plane." Jonathan looked up slowly. Standing above him was flight attendant Melissa Carter, her uniform crisp, her hair tied neatly beneath her cap. She gestured toward the economy cabin with a faint wave of her hand. On her ring finger, a wedding band caught the cabin light, sparkling briefly as if mocking the situation. Jonathan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Around them, other passengers stirred, curiosity pulling their eyes toward 1A. The man in 3C, a middle-aged white executive with slicked-back hair and a self-satisfied grin, leaned back in his seat to watch. Jonathan set his hands on the laptop's edge. "I'm sorry." "What did you say?" Melissa's smile was professional, but her tone sharper the second time. "This seat is not yours. You'll need to move to coach. We have a passenger who actually paid for this section." A hush settled over the cabin, broken only by the faint whir of the air vents. Jonathan closed his laptop slowly, letting the click echo louder than he intended. On the tray table in front of him lay his boarding pass, still unfolded from when he had shown it at the gate. Seat 1, A, first class. His name printed in bold. "Ma'am," Jonathan said evenly, lifting the pass. "This is my seat. I purchased it yesterday. Full fare." Melissa barely looked down. Her eyes swept across his suit, the platinum watch on his wrist, the calm way he held himself. But her expression carried doubt, skepticism that weighed heavier than her words. "Sometimes the system makes mistakes," she replied. "We need to verify this wasn't an upgrade done improperly." From 3C came a chuckle. The man leaned forward, phone raised, its camera glinting red. "This is exactly the kind of thing I talk about," he announced loudly. "People sneaking into first class like they belong here. About time someone enforced the rules." Jonathan felt his chest tighten, not from anger, but from the familiar sting of humiliation. He'd been here before, not on a plane, perhaps, but in restaurants, hotels, even boardrooms where people glanced twice at him before assuming he wasn't supposed to be there. He remembered his father's voice from years ago. "They will always test you. Son, the question is, will you let them decide who you are?" He kept his voice steady. "Would you like to see my receipt? I can pull up the email confirmation right now." "That won't be necessary," Melissa said, though her tone carried anything but reassurance. She turned slightly, raising her voice so it carried across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have this cleared up shortly. Thank you for your patience." Jonathan noticed the ripple of stares, the unspoken assumptions. A young woman in 4B quietly lifted her phone, whispering into the camera of her live stream. "Y'all, this is crazy," she murmured. "They're trying to kick this black man out of first class. For no reason." Her screen showed 17 viewers, then 28, then 54. Jonathan exhaled slowly, fingers brushing the cool metal of his wedding band. He thought of his wife, texting him that morning, "Safe travels, see you tonight." He thought of his 2 children, waiting for him to come home. And he thought of the board meeting rescheduled for that afternoon, where billions in contracts would be decided. He did not have time for this. Still, he understood what was at stake. He adjusted his tie, lifted the boarding pass once more, and extended it toward Melissa with deliberate calm. "This is my seat," he repeated. "First class, 1A." Melissa's lips tightened. She didn't take the pass. Instead, she reached for her walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. "Gate, we have a situation here in first class. Possible misseating. I need someone to confirm." From behind, Jonathan came the faint shuffle of more passengers boarding, forced to squeeze past the confrontation. A few paused, whispering to each other. One older woman clutched her pearls. "What's happening here?" she asked aloud. The man in 3C smirked again, his phone capturing every second. "Man's in the wrong seat, refusing to move," he told her smugly. "Finally, they're doing something about it." Jonathan folded his hands in his lap, still calm, but inside, a storm churned. How many times had he fought this battle in silence? How many times had he swallowed his pride, knowing anger would be used against him? His mind raced between choices: comply and endure the shame, or resist and risk escalation. He looked down at the glowing screen of his phone as it buzzed. A new message from his CFO. Private jet on standby if commercial fails. Board meeting still at 3. Another message from his wife. Kids asking what time you'll be home. Jonathan silenced the phone and straightened in his seat. Around him, the air felt heavier, as though the cabin itself knew what was about to unfold. The seat he had purchased, the dignity he carried, the calm he projected, all were on trial in that moment. And the outcome, Jonathan knew, would be bigger than him. This was not just about one man in seat 1A. It was about who was allowed to belong. Jonathan sat motionless, his boarding pass still resting in his hand. He could feel the weight of every gaze in the cabin pressing down on him. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder, almost mocking, filling the silence between each spoken word. His cold coffee sat untouched on the tray table, the faint scent of burnt roast lingering like an afterthought. Melissa Carter stood tall, her uniform pressed perfectly, her chin raised as if she were defending sacred territory. She tapped her pen against the passenger manifest in her hand, each click sharp as a judge's gavel. "Sir, the system is showing you booked an economy seat last night at 11:47. This," she gestured toward the slip of paper Jonathan held, "must be an error." Jonathan lifted his eyes, calm, unblinking. "I didn't book economy. I booked first class. This very seat." Melissa hesitated, only for a breath. She had seen that look before, the look of a man who knew exactly who he was and refused to let anyone redefine him. But still, she pressed forward. "We have to treat all irregularities the same way. Sir, you'll need to wait in economy until this is resolved." From 3C, Greg Thompson leaned forward, seizing the moment like a shark circling prey. His phone camera stayed trained on Jonathan. "This is what I mean about people gaming the system. He's wasting everyone's time. Rules exist for a reason. If I pay for first class, I want first class to mean something." The words cut sharper than Greg intended. A ripple went through the cabin. A few passengers nodded, others frowned. But the teenager in 4B, Ava Johnson, raised her phone a little higher. Her whisper carried urgency as she spoke to her growing live audience. "Y'all, look at this. He literally showed them his boarding pass. Seat 1A, clear as day, but they're acting like he doesn't belong here." Her viewer count ticked higher, 74, then 120, then 243. Hearts floated across her screen. Comments scrolled, "This is racist as hell. Stand your ground, brother." Others less kind. "He probably sneaked in. Just escort him out already." Jonathan inhaled through his nose, held the breath, then exhaled slowly. He reminded himself of his father's lessons, of nights at the dinner table when his dad would tell him stories of fighting battles without fists, of winning wars with patience. He could almost hear the words again. "Son, they'll try to move you off your path. Don't let them. Your dignity is worth more than their suspicion." He turned the boarding pass around and held it close to Melissa's face. His voice was steady, even. "First class, 1A, Jonathan Reed, purchased yesterday, paid in full. There is no irregularity, only a mistake in your system." Melissa pursed her lips, then stepped back. She whispered into her walkie-talkie, her words too low to catch. Jonathan watched her carefully. He saw the nervous flutter in her fingers, the quick dart of her eyes to the front galley. He recognized the look. It was not about policy anymore. It was about assumption. Behind her, the flow of passengers slowed as they entered the cabin, forced to squeeze past the standoff at the very front. A middle-aged woman carrying a designer handbag muttered under her breath, "Some people always cause problems." A young man in headphones glanced at Jonathan, then gave him the faintest nod of solidarity before slipping into his seat. Jonathan's phone buzzed again on the tray table. Another email. his assistant reminding him that the board meeting materials were already uploaded, his CFO asking if the jet was still an option, his wife sending a photo of their children eating breakfast, smiles wide, unaware of the storm brewing in a cabin thousands of feet from the runway. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured his daughter's laughter, his son's unfiltered curiosity. He wanted to be home tonight, to kiss their foreheads, to tell them stories before bed. He wondered how he would explain this. Daddy was asked to leave his seat today. Not because he did anything wrong, but because someone decided he didn't belong. The ache sat heavy in his chest. Melissa returned, this time with another figure behind her. A young gate agent, no older than 25, tablet in hand, nervously clutching it like a shield. Her badge read Claire Summers. She avoided Jonathan's gaze, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of authority she wasn't sure she wanted. "According to our system, you purchased a coach ticket, 11:47 last night. That's what's showing here." Jonathan tapped his phone, opened his email, and held it up. The confirmation gleamed on the screen. Clear as day, first class F, seat 1A. He extended it calmly toward her. "There must be confusion in your system, but this is my receipt." Claire's lips parted. Words caught in her throat. She looked at Melissa, then at the screen, then back at Jonathan. Greg spoke louder, angling his phone to capture the moment. "See? They always have some excuse. Always another story. He should just move and stop holding everyone up." The words pierced deeper than Greg understood. Jonathan turned his head slowly, his gaze settling on Greg. He did not speak. He didn't need to. The silence itself was sharper than any retort. Ava's live stream was buzzing now with more than 600 viewers. Her eyes darted between her phone and the scene unfolding in front of her. "Okay, guys, it's getting heated," she whispered. "Security is probably coming next. This man is literally showing proof, but they don't want to believe him. Like, wow." Her comment section exploded. "Stay strong. King. Document everything. They just don't like seeing a black man in first class." Jonathan felt the walls of the cabin closing in. The polished wood trim, the faint leather scent, the murmurs, the judgment, the pressure of being scrutinized by strangers and by an audience of unseen thousands online. He pressed his fingers lightly against his temple. In his mind, he argued with himself. Do I comply, swallow the humiliation, and let this pass? Or do I stand firm and risk being dragged out like a criminal? He thought of news clips, of men of color forced off planes, videos gone viral, families embarrassed, dignity stripped away. He thought of his shareholders, his employees, the hundreds of lives depending on him to lead. He chose silence again. Silence, but not surrender. Melissa's patience was thinning. She tapped her walkie-talkie more aggressively this time. "Security. Please come forward." Passenger refusing to comply. The words rang like a verdict. From the corner of his eye, Jonathan saw Claire shift uncomfortably, as if she too questioned whether this was right. But she said nothing. The curtain behind him rustled. New voices approached. The air thickened with anticipation. The teenager's live stream counter hit 847 viewers. And rising. Jonathan folded his hands on the tray table, his boarding pass still visible, his phone screen glowing beside it. He straightened his shoulders, sat taller, and fixed his gaze forward. Whatever storm was coming, he would meet it with the same composure that had carried him through boardrooms, negotiations, and battles far greater than this. The seat was his dignity was his, and he would not be moved. The cabin door hissed as another figure entered. Jonathan did not turn at first, but he felt the shift in the atmosphere. Conversations hushed. Eyes widened. The unmistakable bulk of a security officer stepped into the aisle. Officer Daniel Lopez adjusted the strap of his belt as he approached. His presence was heavy, his boots thudding softly against the carpet. He wore the airline's contracted security uniform, his radio already crackling with static. One hand rested near the device as though anticipating the need to call for backup. His expression was carved from suspicion and authority, the kind of face used to compliance. Melissa exhaled, almost in relief, as if reinforcements had arrived to validate her decision. "Officer, this passenger refuses to move to his correct seat," she said, pointing squarely at Jonathan. Jonathan lifted his gaze slowly. He had met men like Lopez before. They carried the posture of control, trained to project power in confined spaces. But he also saw the flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes. "Sir," Lopez began, his tone formal, "let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. If you come with me now, we can resolve this quickly. No need for escalation." Jonathan folded his hands over the boarding pass resting in his lap. His voice was calm. "There is nothing to resolve. I am in the seat I purchased. Seat 1A. First class. Paid in full." Lopez shifted his weight. "Sir, I understand what you're saying, but the system shows otherwise. The easiest solution is for you to come with me to economy until this is sorted out." The phrase stung, though Lopez likely thought it benign. The easiest solution, not the right one, not the just one, just the one that kept order, regardless of dignity. Jonathan's silence stretched, heavy as stone. Around him, passengers leaned forward in their seats, hungry for drama, anxious for resolution. Greg Thompson in 3C kept narrating to his phone. "See? Now security's here. Finally. This is how you handle rule breakers. I've seen this 100 times. People trying to take what they didn't earn." Jonathan turned his head just slightly, his eyes locking onto Greg's lens. The businessman faltered, words drying in his throat. For the first time, Greg seemed aware of the gravity of recording a man who refused to be diminished. Ava Johnson's live stream count had surged to over 1,000. Her voice trembled with excitement as she whispered into her phone. "Oh my God. Guys, security is here. They're surrounding him. He hasn't raised his voice once. He just keeps showing the pass, but they won't believe him." Comments exploded across her feed. "Stay calm, brother. We got you. This is America. 2025, nothing has changed. Document everything." Jonathan's pulse quickened, though his face remained serene. Inside, two voices battled for dominance. One urged him to comply, to avoid the spectacle of being dragged off a plane. The other insisted that surrender now meant surrender forever. Not only for himself, but for every person who looked like him and carried his story. He remembered being a boy, standing with his father outside a department store when security stopped them, accusing his father of shoplifting. His father had stood tall, calm, and unyielding, explaining with measured words until the guard backed down. Jonathan had never forgotten the dignity of that stance. He felt the echo of it now. Seated in 1A, Officer Lopez took a step closer. "Sir, this is your last warning. You can walk off voluntarily, or we will have to escort you. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." Jonathan's fingers brushed the edge of his phone. The glowing screen still displayed the confirmation email, evidence of truth ignored by those who chose doubt over facts. He thought of calling the airline's corporate line, of demanding justice immediately. But something inside told him the timing was not yet right. The silence thickened until it pressed against every passenger in the cabin. A woman in 2D shifted uncomfortably, whispering to her husband, "This doesn't seem right." He shook his head but said nothing, eyes fixed on his own phone where a Twitter thread was already taking shape. Melissa crossed her arms, her confidence swelling with the presence of security. "Sir, you're disrupting the flight. Company policy allows us to reseat passengers in cases of discrepancy." Jonathan tilted his head slightly. His voice was quiet, almost soft, yet it carried across the tense space. "What discrepancy? I am sitting in the seat I purchased. The only disruption here is your refusal to accept that fact." Lopez's radio crackled. A voice from dispatch came through, impatient. "Unit 4 status update. Do you need backup?" The officer hesitated, eyes flicking between Jonathan and Melissa. He pressed the button on his shoulder. "In progress. Passenger non-compliant." The word echoed in Jonathan's ears. Non-compliant. It was the label stamped onto every man or woman who dared to stand against injustice, a phrase that excused the violence that often followed. His chest tightened. His inner voice whispered warnings of humiliation, of headlines, of stock prices dipping when the video surfaced. Another voice whispered of responsibility, of legacy, of the power he carried not just for himself, but for thousands of employees whose livelihoods were tied to his leadership. He straightened his back, shoulders squared, and clasped his hands together. His wedding ring gleamed in the cabin light, a reminder of love and of vows to protect what mattered. He chose stillness over submission, patience over panic. Ava's voice carried over the growing hum of the live stream. "This is insane. Look at him. He's calm, polite, showing proof, and they're treating him like a criminal." Her comment section erupted. "Tag the news. Call a lawyer. We're watching. Brother, we see you. Greg Thompson." Frustrated that Jonathan's composure robbed him of the chaos he craved, raised his voice. "You're holding up the entire flight. Some of us have connections to make. This isn't about race. It's about rules. You're selfish." Jonathan turned to him at last, his eyes steady, his voice even. "No, sir. This is about dignity, about truth, and about whether justice can exist at 30,000 feet. The words landed like a gavel strike. Passengers shifted in their seats, the line between right and wrong suddenly less blurry. The man in 2C posted his tweet, watching Aero Vista staff harass a well-dressed black passenger in first class. He's calm, polite, and showing proof they refuse to listen. This is 2025. The thread began to spread before the plane even left the ground. Lopez cleared his throat, uneasy now. The authority he carried felt less certain in the face of Jonathan's quiet strength. He looked to Melissa for direction, but even she seemed rattled by the growing disapproval bubbling through the cabin. The tension was a living thing now, pulsing in the narrow space, pressing on every chest, whispering into every phone recording the moment. Jonathan took another slow breath. He knew the storm had only begun, and he was ready. The first-class cabin of Flight 982 no longer felt like a place of comfort. It had transformed into a stage where every glance, every whisper, every recorded frame of video added weight to a verdict that had yet to be delivered. Jonathan Reed sat in the center of it all, motionless in seat 1A, while around him voices sharpened into arguments and judgments. Melissa Carter stood rigid in the aisle, her arms crossed, her authority clinging to her like armor. Officer Daniel Lopez hovered nearby, shifting uneasily, caught between procedure and doubt. Claire Summers, the young gate agent, had retreated a few steps, her tablet glowing in her hands but her confidence dimming. And then there were the passengers. They had become a jury, though unappointed and unqualified, their biases and beliefs shaping the way they interpreted every word. Greg Thompson, still in 3C with his phone camera fixed forward, leaned in with a theatrical sigh. This is what I mean. Every year it gets worse. People taking seats they didn't pay for, disrupting everyone else. If I behaved this way, they'd throw me out immediately. His voice rang loud, meant to be heard not only by the cabin, but by the unseen audience on his recording. He looked around, inviting agreement, his smirk daring others to challenge him. An older woman across the aisle nodded slowly. "Well, rules are rules," she murmured, her pearls catching the light. "If the staff says he belongs in economy, he should listen. We can't have disorder." But her husband, seated beside her, frowned. He showed them his ticket. "Margaret, didn't you see it said first class clear as day?" The divide rippled through the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads in quiet disapproval, others in resignation. The air grew heavier with every opinion voiced. Jonathan sat tall, his boarding pass resting on the tray table like Exhibit A in a trial. He had shown it multiple times, he had explained calmly. Yet here he was, still surrounded, still doubted. His silence was not weakness, it was strategy. He understood that every word he chose now would echo, not only in this cabin but through every phone broadcasting the moment. From row 4, Ava Johnson's live stream continued to surge. Her voice carried an edge of disbelief as she updated her audience. "Guys, the passengers are literally arguing about him right now. Some are defending him. Others think he's lying. But you saw the ticket when he held it up. Seat 1A, it's right there. This is wild." Her viewers climbed past 1,500. Comments flew in rapid succession. "He's calm because he knows the truth. They just don't want to see him there. Keep recording. Ava, you're our eyes." Greg scoffed at the murmurs of support. He raised his voice again, performing for his lens. "I've flown over 200,000 miles with Aero Vista. I've earned the right to peace in first class. I don't want to sit next to someone who sneaked up here. End of story." Jonathan turned his head slightly, his gaze brushing Greg's face. He did not speak, but his eyes held a quiet fire, a refusal to shrink under the weight of prejudice disguised as principle. Greg faltered for a split second, his words catching, though he quickly recovered with another smug tilt of his chin. The man in 2C, a business traveler who had been quietly typing on his laptop, finally spoke. His voice was clear, measured, and just loud enough to carry across the cabin. "Actually," he said, "from where I sit, the only disruption has been caused by the staff insisting this gentleman doesn't belong here. He has shown his ticket more than once. If he were white, would we even be having this discussion?" The words hung in the air like thunder. Melissa's jaw tightened. Greg snapped his head toward the man, his phone capturing the exchange. "Stay out of this," Greg snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the point had landed. Whispers grew louder. The unspoken question echoed in every mind. Would this scene be happening if Jonathan looked different? Jonathan's heart beat steady, though inside he felt the weight of centuries pressing onto his shoulders. He thought of every time someone questioned his presence in a room, every time he had to prove he deserved the chair he sat in, the table he negotiated at, the title he carried. He thought of his employees, hundreds of them traveling on Aerovista flights each year, expecting dignity as much as efficiency. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from his wife. "How's the flight? Love you." He stared at the words for a long moment. He typed back only slight delay. "Tell you later." The contrast struck him how love at home felt so certain, while dignity in public spaces still had to be defended like stolen property. Melissa straightened, speaking louder as though volume alone would restore her authority. "Sir, refusal to follow crew instructions is grounds for removal. You are refusing to move to your assigned seat. That is non-compliance." Jonathan lifted the boarding pass slowly, holding it high enough for everyone to see. His voice was calm, each syllable deliberate. "This is my assigned seat. First class, 1A, purchased at full price. What instruction am I refusing to follow?" "The instruction to surrender my rightful seat." The logic cut sharp, undeniable. Yet Melissa's face hardened. She could not back down now without admitting fault. Officer Lopez shifted again, his radio hissing faintly. Dispatch crackled through. "Unit 4, what's your status? We're holding departure." He pressed the button. "Passenger remains non-compliant. Awaiting supervisor." The words sent another ripple through the cabin. The man in 2C leaned forward, typing furiously. His Twitter thread was already gathering traction. The hashtag #AeroVista was beginning to appear. Ava's live stream hit 300 viewers. She lowered her voice as she spoke into her phone. "They're doubling down. Security just called him non-compliant, even though he literally showed proof again. This feels like it's about to explode." Jonathan closed his laptop with quiet precision. The click echoed in the tense air. He folded his hands together, his expression composed. Inside, his mind wrestled with questions. Do I escalate now? Do I call Clara Hale, the CEO, and end this instantly? Or do I wait? Let them show the world exactly what they are before I reveal who I am. He chose patience. The lesson his father taught him decades ago burned in his chest. Sometimes the most powerful move is to let others expose themselves, Greg muttered again, mostly to his phone. Finally, someone's enforcing standards around here. This is how you protect the value of first class. Jonathan ignored him, keeping his gaze steady ahead. He could feel the eyes of the cabin on him, judging, doubting, supporting, condemning. He was both defendant and witness, his dignity the case under review. The aisle had become a courtroom. The passengers were the jury, and Jonathan Reed, seated in 1A, was both the accused and the symbol of something far larger. He knew the verdict was still coming, and he would be ready to face it. Jonathan Reed sat as if carved from stone, his posture perfectly still while the chaos swirled around him. In his lap, the boarding pass remained visible, the bold print declaring what should have ended the debate long ago. First class, seat 1A, paid in full. Yet the cabin was a theater of disbelief, doubt, and spectacle. The hum of the engines outside was steady, a reminder that time itself was moving forward even as his flight remained stuck in limbo. Each minute pressed heavier against his chest. He knew delays meant more whispers, more recordings, more eyes waiting for him to break. Inside, his mind was not calm. It was a battlefield. One part of him wanted to erupt, to stand and demand justice in a voice that could not be ignored. He imagined himself raising his voice, calling out the injustice for what it was, shaming Melissa, Officer Lopez, and every other staff member who had doubted him. He could picture passengers gasping, some in support, others in shock, their phones capturing the fury of a man who had been wronged. But another voice, deeper and more familiar, warned him. That voice belonged to his father. He could almost hear it, steady and low, as if the man were seated beside him again. Don't give them the excuse, son. They'll twist your anger into a weapon against you. Patience is your shield. Silence is your sword. Jonathan swallowed hard. His father had died years ago, but the lessons lived on, etched into his bones. He remembered one night when he was 15. They had been driving home from a late church service when a patrol car pulled them over. The officer had asked his father to step out, his tone dripping suspicion. Jonathan had sat frozen in the passenger seat, terrified. His father had remained calm, his voice polite but firm, explaining every movement, every action, until they were finally released. Later that night, he had told Jonathan, sometimes surviving the moment is more important than winning it. That memory burned fresh now. He understood survival, but he also understood something else. He was no longer a boy. He was a man with power, influence, and a responsibility to use both wisely. Melissa Carter shifted her weight, her arms still folded. She glanced toward Lopez, then at the passengers. Her authority was slipping, and she knew it. Jonathan could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers tapped against her arm like a drummer losing rhythm. Officer Lopez stood with one hand hovering near his radio. His stance was wide, ready, but there was doubt flickering behind his stern eyes. He looked like a man who wanted the problem to vanish, not escalate. Greg Thompson, however, thrived on the escalation. His phone camera was still trained on Jonathan, his voice carrying smug satisfaction. He's just sitting there, acting all high and mighty. If the rest of us followed the rules, why should he be the exception? Some people think the world owes them. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, shutting Greg out. He let the hum of the cabin wash over him, the sound of air systems, the faint click of a keyboard from the man in 2C, the soft murmur of passengers debating whether he was right or wrong. Every detail grounded him, kept him from drifting into anger. He opened his eyes and looked down at his phone. His wife's message still glowed softly. "Love you." He imagined her face, warm and reassuring, her voice calming their children when they asked why Daddy was away again. He wanted to be home tonight, to tuck them in, to remind them that the world could be kind even when it was cruel. But what would he tell them about this? That their father, despite everything he had achieved, was still treated as if he did not belong. Would his son see it as weakness if he complied? Would his daughter lose faith if he did not resist? The questions gnawed at him, sharp as teeth. Across the aisle, the older woman with pearls muttered again, "This has taken too long. We should have left by now." Her husband responded, louder this time, his patience gone. We should have left because this man should never have been questioned. Can't you see what's happening here? He's being profiled. The word hung in the air like smoke. Profiled. It shifted the energy. Several passengers turned toward the couple, murmuring in agreement. Others shook their heads, unwilling to admit what was unfolding before their eyes. Jonathan felt the tide turning, but he did not claim it. Not yet. He kept his silence, letting others fill the space with their voices. Ava Johnson's livestream counter ticked higher. Nearly 3,000 viewers now. Her commentary grew more intense. Guys, this is unreal. The passengers are literally debating it like it's a courtroom. Some defending him, some siding with the airline. He hasn't raised his voice once. Not once. Her feed exploded with comments. This man is a king for staying calm. I've seen this before. They'll drag him off. We're with you, brother. Jonathan sat still, but inside, the storm raged on. His hands were steady, but his thoughts spiraled. Do I reveal who I am now? Do I call Victoria hail and end this circus in one stroke, or do I let them push until the world sees exactly what this is? The man in 2C spoke again, his voice carrying, I've been live tweeting this. People need to see it. It's already gaining traction. The world is watching. Melissa bristled. Sir, please remain uninvolved. This does not concern you, but it did concern him. It concerned everyone in that cabin. It concerned everyone watching online. And Jonathan knew it would soon concern far more than that. He reached for his coffee, now lukewarm, and lifted the cup with slow precision. The taste was bitter, but he sipped it anyway. It was a ritual of control, a statement that he would not be rushed, not be rattled, not be stripped of composure. Melissa leaned closer, her voice dropping but not enough to hide the edge. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just move to economy and we'll sort it out later. Jonathan placed the cup down gently and met her eyes. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of mountains. The only thing making this harder is your refusal to accept the truth. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Lopez shifted again, uncomfortable with the standstill. Greg muttered curses into his phone. Ava's whisper grew more excited as her feed surpassed 4,000 viewers. Jonathan sat back, folded his hands once more, and let the silence do the work. He understood now. The silence was not just for himself, it was for every eye watching, every heart judging, every voice waiting to rise. It was a mirror held up to the injustice unfolding. And in that silence, Jonathan Reed wielded more power than any outburst could ever deliver. The air in the cabin had grown thick, heavy with tension. Every passenger could feel it pressing against their skin like an invisible weight. Jonathan Reed remained still, hands folded neatly, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Around him, the storm of doubt, authority, and prejudice swirled louder by the minute. Then the curtain at the front of the cabin shifted. A man stepped through, his presence commanding before he spoke a word. Captain Richard O'Connor, silver hair gleaming under the cabin lights, moved with the steady confidence of someone who had spent 40 years mastering the skies. His uniform was immaculate, his shoulders square, his eyes sharp with authority. What's the situation here? His voice carried across the cabin, not loud but resonant, the kind of tone that cut through noise and demanded attention. Melissa Carter straightened immediately, as though she had been waiting for backup. Captain, this passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions. He booked a coach seat but is sitting in first class. We've asked him to move several times. He refuses. The words landed like a practice script, polished and rehearsed. Melissa's chin lifted slightly as if certain her captain would side with her. Jonathan turned his head slowly, meeting the captain's eyes. He did not speak. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment press into the air. Officer Daniel Lopez cleared his throat. "Captain, I was called because the passenger remains non-compliant. He's refusing to move." The phrase hung there again. Non-compliant. It was becoming a refrain. A hammer striking the same nail. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his expression did not shift. The captain's gaze swept the cabin, pausing briefly on the boarding pass still lying on Jonathan's tray table. He frowned. Has he shown proof of his ticket? Jonathan lifted the pass without a word, extending it calmly toward the captain. O'Connor stepped closer, taking it from his hand. His eyes scanned the paper carefully. The letters were bold, unmistakable. First class, 1A, Jonathan Reed. Melissa interjected quickly, her voice rising with urgency. "Captain, the system shows economy. 11:47 last night. It's a clear discrepancy." The captain lowered the pass, his expression unreadable. He turned to Jonathan. "Sir, do you also have a receipt or email confirmation?" Jonathan reached for his phone, tapped the screen, and pulled up the email. He held it out so the captain could see. The screen glowed with the words that had become his shield. First Class F, Seat 1A. Captain O'Connor's jaw flexed slightly as he absorbed the contradiction. On one hand, the boarding pass and email were clear. On the other, his crew stood insisting otherwise. Behind them, passengers watched in silence, as though witnessing a trial where the judge had just been handed the key piece of evidence. Greg Thompson could not hold his tongue. "Captain, I fly this airline constantly. I've seen this trick before. People sneak up from economy, print fake tickets, wave them around, and think they can get away with it. We can't just let this slide." His words carried, harsh and arrogant. Ava Johnson's phone captured every second. Her live stream had climbed past 5,000 viewers now. She whispered quickly into her phone, "Guys, the captain has the pass in his hand. He's seen the email, too, but the staff keeps insisting it's wrong. This is crazy. You can feel the tension in here." Comments streamed across her screen. "Don't let them move him. The captain better do the right thing. We're watching this unfold live. Document everything." Jonathan's heart pounded steadily. Inside, though, he fought another war. Do I speak now? Do I reveal my leverage, call Victoria Hale, and end this? Or do I hold, wait for them to show the world who they are? He thought of the live cameras, of every person in that cabin who would retell this story. His silence was both weapon and shield, but it was heavy, unbearably heavy. Captain O'Connor exhaled slowly, handing the boarding pass back to Jonathan. "Mr. Reed, I understand your position, but according to our systems, this is not your seat. We cannot hold departure indefinitely. I need resolution." The words were diplomatic, but they leaned toward the crew. Jonathan recognized the tone. It was the voice of authority that valued efficiency above justice, procedure above truth. He lifted his eyes, voice low but firm. "Captain, the only resolution is to acknowledge what is in your hand and on this screen. That is truth. Anything else is injustice." The captain stiffened. He was not a man used to being challenged. He opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in. It was the business traveler in 2C. "Captain, I've been documenting this. That man has shown his boarding pass at least 3 times. He has shown his email. He is calm, polite, not disruptive. If you remove him, you will be removing a paying customer from the seat he rightfully purchased." The words spread like sparks. Passengers murmured louder now. Some nodded, others whispered agreement. Melissa's eyes flashed. This isn't about his behavior. It's about policy. If we let passengers decide where to sit, what happens to order on the plane? Her argument rang hollow now, stretched thin against the mounting evidence. Ava's voice trembled as she whispered into her phone. "Y'all, passengers are starting to side with him. The captain is caught in the middle. The crew looks nervous. This is about to go viral." The live stream counter ticked past 6,000. Comments poured in, demanding accountability. Jonathan leaned back slightly, hands folded once again, inside. He felt the storm raging, but he forced it into stillness. His father's lesson echoed once more: patience, composure, dignity. He thought of his employees, hundreds of them who would face moments like this in hotels, airports, conference rooms. He thought of his children, who would one day ask why their father fought battles that others never had to. He thought of his wife, her message of love grounding him in the middle of humiliation. The captain rubbed his temple. He had been trained for turbulence, for storms that battered wings and engines, but this storm was human, and it threatened to tear apart more than a flight schedule. Lopez's radio crackled again. Dispatch pressed. Unit 4 status. We need clearance for departure. The captain's voice grew sharper. Folks, we need immediate resolution. We cannot delay this flight much longer. Melissa stepped forward, sensing her chance. Captain, per section 12.4 of the manual, crew instructions must be followed pending resolution. He must move. The citation sounded official, but Jonathan saw the desperation in her eyes. She needed this to end her way. He breathed deeply, steadying himself. He could feel the weight of every eye, every phone, every unseen viewer beyond the cabin walls. He was both man and symbol, flesh and idea. His thumb hovered over the first contact in his phone. Victoria Hale, CEO of Aerovista Airlines. The power to end this entire charade sat at his fingertips. Yet he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of calculation. The timing had to be perfect. For now, silence remained his weapon, and as the captain stood torn, as Melissa pushed her policy, as passengers argued and live streams multiplied, Jonathan Reed waited, because he knew the truth. The longer they pushed, the heavier the consequences would fall when the truth finally broke free. Jonathan Reed sat as if rooted to the seat, his boarding pass once again resting near his folded hands. The cabin lights seemed brighter now, harsher, as though exposing every detail of the confrontation that refused to end. He had not moved, had not raised his voice, yet the storm around him raged louder by the second. Captain Richard O'Connor stood only feet away, his uniform immaculate, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He looked like a man who had weathered countless storms at 30,000 feet. But this storm was not one his training had prepared him for. His eyes shifted between his flight attendant, his security officer, and Jonathan, weighing choices with consequences he could not fully calculate. Melissa Carter held her posture stiff, her arms folded, her eyes bright with defiance. She clung to her interpretation of policy like a lifeline. "Captain," she said again, her voice tight, "he has to move. Section 12.4 makes it clear. Pending resolution, passengers must follow crew instructions." The words sounded rehearsed now, as though she'd repeated them too many times. The passengers who had been listening for nearly 20 minutes were beginning to lose patience, and her tone no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. Officer Daniel Lopez shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His radio hissed again. Dispatch pressed, impatient. "Unit 4. Do we have resolution departure window closing?" He pressed the button with reluctance. Still in progress. Jonathan watched them, silent. Inside, the voices of doubt and conviction clashed like cymbals. His mind rehearsed every possible outcome. He could call Victoria Hale right now. With a single press, the cabin would transform. The captain would snap to attention. The flight attendant would crumble. The officer would retreat. It would be over. But timing mattered. If he called too soon, the lesson would not be learned. If he called too late, he risked humiliation that could scar deeper than even his wealth and power could heal. He thought of his father again, the lessons of patience drilled into him, but also the knowledge that sometimes silence alone was not enough. Greg Thompson, in seat 3C, provided no relief from the storm. His voice grated against the cabin walls. "Captain, why are we wasting time? I've got a connection to make in Chicago. If it were me in that seat, they would have removed me by now. This is special treatment." The irony of his words was bitter. Jonathan nearly allowed himself a smile, but his face remained calm. He would not give Greg the satisfaction of reaction. Ava Johnson, only 16 years old, but holding more influence in this moment than she understood, whispered into her phone. "Guys, we're at over 7,000 viewers now. Everyone's watching. They're saying this could hit the news before the plane even takes off. People are angry. They can't believe this is happening." Her comment feed was a flood. "Stay strong. Brother, we see you. Expose them. Call the CEO. Do it live." Jonathan's phone buzzed again. His assistant, his CFO, his board secretary. Notifications stacked like dominoes. He ignored them all. His eyes stayed fixed on the captain. His silence a mirror that reflected the absurdity of the situation. The business traveler in 2C closed his laptop and finally raised his voice. "Captain, with respect, we all see what's happening. He has the boarding pass. He has the email. He has remained calm and respectful. The disruption isn't caused by him. It's caused by the refusal to accept the truth." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. Even those who had doubted Jonathan earlier shifted uncomfortably now. The weight of evidence was undeniable. Melissa shot the man a glare. "Sir, please refrain from interfering. You don't understand the full context." But she sounded smaller now. Her words, once sharp, had dulled against the growing resistance. Jonathan reached for his coffee cup again, lifting it with deliberate slowness. He took a sip, though the liquid was bitter and cold. It was an act of control, of reminding himself that this space, this seat, this moment still belonged to him. The captain rubbed his forehead. "We're out of time. We cannot hold departure much longer." Jonathan's fingers brushed the edge of his phone again. His thumb hovered over the contact at the very top. Victoria Hale, CEO. He stared at the name, knowing that one call would shift the ground beneath every person in this cabin. His inner voice wavered. "Do it now. Show them who you are." Show them what power looks like. But another voice, the quieter one, whispered, "Let them go one step further. Let them try. The world is watching. Let them show themselves before you reveal the truth." He hesitated. The silence thickened. Greg rolled his eyes dramatically, aiming his phone so that his audience could see Jonathan's stillness. Look at him, sitting there pretending to be noble. He's just trying to milk the situation, probably hoping for a free upgrade and a payout later. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice low but carrying through the cabin. "If you believe dignity is a payout, then you've never understood what dignity costs." The word stung. Greg faltered for a moment, his smirk twitching. Passengers murmured again, the balance shifting further. Ava's live stream count hit 8,000. She whispered in awe, "Did you guys hear that he's speaking now? Oh my God, this is history happening." Captain O'Connor checked his watch, then the passengers. His decision balanced on a knife's edge. Melissa pressed forward, her voice urgent. "Captain, I insist. If he does not comply, we must remove him. Rules are rules." Jonathan inhaled deeply, the air heavy in his lungs. He looked at Melissa, then at Lopez, then at the captain. Finally, he lifted his phone. His thumb hovered over Victoria Hale's name. He pressed the screen once, twice. The call dialed. The ring echoed in his ear. The cabin fell silent. Every conversation frozen. Every passenger leaning forward. Even Greg stopped speaking, his camera catching his own unease. Ava's live stream counter jumped past 9,000. The phone rang again. Then a third time. And then came the voice. Familiar, warm, confident. "Jonathan, how's the flight treating you?" Every sound in the cabin died at once. Melissa's face paled. Lopez's radio slipped in his grip. The captain blinked. Stunned, passengers gasped softly, realizing the name and voice that had just filled the air. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his voice calm, almost casual. "Victoria, I'm on your flight 982, seat 1A. I'm having a very interesting conversation with your staff about whether I belong here." The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. Every person in the cabin knew the storm had just turned, and Jonathan Reed, who had sat silent for nearly an hour, finally let his truth speak for him. For a moment, after Victoria Hale's voice filled the cabin, the air seemed to vanish. Every passenger held their breath. The silence was electric, the kind of silence that makes a heart pound louder than the sound of engines. "Jonathan," she repeated, her voice warm but puzzled. "I wasn't expecting your call until after the board meeting this afternoon. How's the flight treating you?" Jonathan's eyes never left Melissa Carter. Calmly, deliberately. He pressed the speaker button so the voice of the CEO filled the first-class cabin. "Victoria," he said, his voice steady as stone. "Your staff is attempting to remove me from the seat I purchased. They claim I don't belong here." A ripple of gasps spread across the passengers. Melissa's jaw slackened. Officer Lopez froze, his radio dangling at his side. Captain O'Connor blinked as though blindsided by a sudden crosswind. On the live stream, Ava Johnson's viewers exploded past 11,000. Her voice shook with excitement. "Guys, oh my God, did you hear that he just called the CEO? She's on speaker. This is insane." Greg Thompson's phone caught his own reflection now, his confident smirk faltering into something closer to fear. The recording he had meant as proof of disruption had turned into evidence of arrogance. On the other end of the line, Victoria's tone sharpened. "I'm sorry, Jonathan. Did I hear you correctly? My staff is trying to remove you from your first-class seat." Jonathan nodded once, though the gesture was more for the audience around him than for the phone. "That is correct." The pause that followed was heavier than thunder. Then her voice dropped into something cool, precise, and unmistakably lethal. "Put me on with whoever is in charge." Every eye turned toward Captain O'Connor. His throat tightened. He leaned forward, speaking carefully. "This is Captain Richard O'Connor, Miss Hale." Victoria cut him off. "Captain is Mr. Reed's still surrounded by my employees as though he's some kind of trespasser." The captain glanced around. Lopez, Melissa, Claire, the gate agent, still clutching her tablet, all eyes on Jonathan. He swallowed. "Yes, Miss Hale." The cabin filled with a silence so profound it seemed to press against the walls. "Then explain to me," Victoria continued, her voice now sharpened steel, "why my staff is attempting to remove one of our most valued clients from a seat he rightfully purchased." Melissa's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat seemed to forget how to form sound. Finally, she managed a faint, stammering whisper. "Miss Hale." There was a system discrepancy. We thought his ticket was thought Victoria's voice sliced through her stammer. "You thought, did you verify? Did you confirm with operations before humiliating him in front of an entire cabin?" Ava whispered into her phone, barely containing her awe. "She's tearing into them. This is unbelievable. Y'all are hearing this live." Her viewers surged past 15,000. Comments flew in like sparks. Accountability, finally. She's about to fire them on the spot. This is history. Jonathan sat still, watching Melissa shrink into herself. He had said few words, but the weight of his silence had shifted the balance entirely. He remembered his father's lesson, patience as a weapon, and now he saw it unfolding like a perfectly timed play. Captain O'Connor attempted damage control, his tone diplomatic. "Miss Hale," with respect. "I believe this was a simple miscommunication. If we can resolve this matter quietly." "Quietly," Victoria snapped. "Captain, I am watching social feeds right now. Do you realize this incident is trending? Do you understand what it means that my largest corporate client is being treated like a criminal by my own employees? Quiet is no longer an option." Gasps rippled again. Largest corporate client. The words detonated across the cabin. Passengers turned to Jonathan with new eyes, realizing the man they doubted only moments ago held the kind of power that could shake an entire airline. Greg's hand trembled, his phone recording his own face now twisted in panic. He muttered, almost inaudibly, "Oh, God." Melissa's knees seemed to weaken. She clutched the back of a seat for balance, her face pale. Officer Lopez stepped back, as though the words themselves had physical force. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm, casual, devastating. "Victoria, should I show them the corporate travel contract we signed last month? The one worth $127 million annually. The number hit the cabin like lightning. 127 million. Passengers whispered, eyes wide. The teenager's live stream exploded. 127 M. This man pays their salaries. They messed with the wrong one. On the line, Victoria's voice was clear. "I see. Melissa Carter, Daniel Lopez, Claire Summers. Effective immediately. You are suspended without pay pending investigation. Captain O'Connor, you will personally insure Mr. Reed receives exemplary service for the remainder of this flight. Am I understood?" "Yes, ma'am," the captain said quickly, his voice stripped of resistance. Melissa's hand shook. Lopez's radio nearly slipped from his fingers. Claire's tablet lowered slowly to her side. Jonathan leaned back, his hands still folded, his composure unbroken. Inside, though, he felt a release, a quiet victory. He had waited, endured, and now the tide had turned. Victoria's voice softened slightly, directed back to him. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry this happened. We will discuss remedies privately. But please know the individuals responsible will face full consequences. This airline will not tolerate what you experienced." Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Thank you. Victoria, I look forward to our conversation." The line clicked. Silence returned, heavier than before. But now the weight had shifted. The power no longer pressed against Jonathan. It pressed against everyone who had doubted him. The passengers exhaled almost in unison. Some shook their heads, stunned. Others looked ashamed. A few glanced at Jonathan with respect, admiration even. Greg sat rigid, his phone lowered, his face pale. He had recorded his own humiliation, his own prejudice, his own complicity. Ava whispered to her audience one final time before her phone battery dipped into the red. "You guys, you just watched it." The CEO herself stepped in. This man, he just changed everything. Jonathan reached for his coffee again, taking one more sip. The bitterness had not faded, but it no longer mattered. He looked around the cabin, his eyes steady, his voice soft. "Now then, shall we fly?" The cabin had fallen into a strange silence after the call ended. It was not peace. It was the stunned quiet that comes when everyone realizes they have witnessed the ground shift beneath their feet. Jonathan Reed sat motionless in his seat, the phone resting on the tray table, the glow of the screen fading as the call disconnected. Melissa Carter lowered herself into the jump seat, her face pale, her eyes avoiding contact with anyone. Officer Lopez stood still, his broad frame suddenly uncertain. The radio at his side quiet for once. Claire Summers clutched her tablet close to her chest, as if it could shield her from the magnitude of what had just happened. The captain returned to the cockpit for a moment, speaking into his headset, his voice tight with urgency. The passengers, meanwhile, whispered in waves. Some murmured apologies to each other, realizing how wrong they had been. Others still processed the revelation that the quiet man in 1A was not just another traveler, but a figure who commanded contracts worth more than the aircraft itself. Jonathan lifted his phone again, his thumb moving across the screen with deliberate care. He opened his calendar, then a folder of files labeled with precision: travel contracts, renewal, proposals. He did not open them yet. He simply let the sight of those documents remind him of the power he carried. Ava Johnson's live stream had died with her battery, but other passengers had picked up where she left off. A woman in 3D now streamed the aftermath on Instagram Live, her voice hushed with awe. "You guys won't believe this. The CEO herself called in. The staff got suspended right here on the plane. It's surreal." Her followers climbed with every passing second. Jonathan exhaled slowly. The silence around him was heavy, but it was also opportunity. He had won the moment, but victory meant nothing if it ended here. His father's voice again whispered through his mind. Survival was important, But real change meant using moments of injustice to build bridges toward transformation. He leaned forward, opening his laptop once more. The screen glowed with graphs, charts, and numbers that had been prepared for a different kind of battlefield, the boardroom. But now the boardroom had come to him, thousands of feet above the ground, with an audience far larger than any meeting. Passengers craned their necks, trying to glimpse the charts upside down. Bars of revenue, slices of pie charts, percentages that looked imposing even without context. Jonathan tapped a few keys, then closed the lid slowly, the gesture purposeful. He turned his attention to Melissa. His voice was calm, not angry, not sharp, but carrying a weight she could not ignore. "Melissa, do you know what your company's largest corporate contract is worth?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She shook her head faintly. $127 million annually, he said evenly. "That is Williams Global Holdings. That is my company. And tonight, your actions nearly put all of it at risk." Her throat worked as she tried to swallow. Her hands twisted together in her lap. She whispered, barely audible, I didn't know." Jonathan nodded once, slow and deliberate. "And that is the point. You didn't know, but you assumed. You assumed based on what you saw, based on what you believed did not belong in this seat." The words sank deep. Passengers leaned in, their own guilt reflected in Melissa's downcast eyes. Officer Lopez shifted uncomfortably, as though the rebuke had splashed onto him too. Jonathan's gaze turned to him. "And you, officer, you were ready to remove me by force. You labeled me non-compliant when I showed proof 3 times. Tell me, what was I refusing to comply with?" Lopez opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes dropped, his voice cracked. I was following procedure." Jonathan's tone did not rise, but it cut sharper than any shout. Procedure that justified removing a man from his rightful seat. Procedure that defined compliance as surrender, not truth. The silence deepened. Even Greg Thompson said nothing now. His phone lowered. His earlier bravado evaporated. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his eyes sweeping the cabin. "Every one of you has witnessed this. Every one of you will carry this story when you leave. But what matters is not the humiliation I endured. What matters is what changes because of it." He tapped the lid of his laptop. "I will be speaking with Victoria Hale within hours, and here is what will be required." The cabin seemed to lean forward as one. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter, as though the aircraft itself listened. "First," Jonathan said, his voice steady, "every incident of bias must be documented and tracked at the corporate level, not buried, not dismissed, recorded and reviewed." A passenger in 2C nodded, his Twitter thread still growing online. "Yes," he whispered. "Second, monthly training on bias and cultural competency. Not annual workshops that fade in memory, but consistent accountability." Melissa closed her eyes, her face twisting with the weight of his words. "Third, executive bonuses tied to inclusion metrics. If incidents increase, pay decreases. If you want accountability, it must begin at the top." Gasps rippled softly. Passengers exchanged looks. They understood the gravity of what he was proposing. Jonathan's voice did not falter. "Fourth, a reporting system for passengers, real-time, accessible, escalated directly to corporate headquarters. No one should feel voiceless when they are humiliated." The woman in 3D whispered to her phone. He's literally rewriting airline policy on the plane. This is history. Fifth, Jonathan continued, a financial commitment. Annual donations to civil rights organizations focused on equity in transportation. Not symbolic, not one time. Annual. The passengers sat in reverent silence. The weight of systemic change filled the air more heavily than the humiliation had only minutes earlier. Jonathan folded his hands once more, his eyes moving across the faces in front of him, and, finally, transparency, public reporting of every discrimination complaint. Let the world see, let shareholders see, let passengers see. The silence that followed was not disbelief, it was awe. The passengers were no longer simply witnesses. They were part of something unfolding larger than themselves. Jonathan sat back, his breathing steady, his voice calm. That is what will come from tonight. Not anger, not revenge, change. He glanced once at Melissa, then at Lopez, then at Greg, whose phone now trembled in his grip. Because dignity is not negotiable, not for me, not for anyone. The cabin exhaled collectively, as though the weight had finally shifted from humiliation to transformation. Jonathan Reed lifted his coffee once more, sipping it slowly, his calm composure unbroken. And at 30,000 feet, he had begun to change not just a flight, but an entire system. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared the aircraft for departure, but no one felt relaxed. The passengers were still buzzing from the confrontation they had just witnessed. Some scrolled through their phones, reading the first trickle of headlines. Others whispered quietly, replaying Jonathan Reed's calm demands. Jonathan himself sat unmoved, his posture tall, his breathing steady. His coffee cup was empty now, but he left it on the tray as if to mark the patience with which he had endured the storm. He knew the call from Victoria Hale was not finished. A CEO did not simply apologize and vanish. There was business yet to be done, and this plane, for better or worse, had become the boardroom. Only minutes later, his phone buzzed again. The caller ID glowed Victoria Hale. Direct line. The timing was deliberate. He let it ring twice before answering. He pressed the speaker button once more. His deep voice steady. Victoria. Her tone was sharp, controlled, the voice of a woman balanced in fury with precision. Jonathan, I have just finished reviewing footage from our operations center. I saw everything. I saw the pass, the email, the refusal to acknowledge either. This is unacceptable. Passengers turned their heads, leaning in to hear. Even those in the rows behind craned forward, straining against their seat belts. They knew instinctively they were listening to something unprecedented. Jonathan's reply was calm, almost detached. You saw what I saw. Proof ignored, dignity denied. Yes, she said, and that will not stand. But before we move forward, I need to understand your expectations. You gave them a list. I heard some of it. Do you want to formalize this? Now Jonathan allowed the silence to stretch. He wanted her to feel the pause, the anticipation in the cabin. Then he answered, Yes, we will formalize it now, while the memory is fresh, while the world is watching. Gasps fluttered through the passengers. They realized he was not negotiating behind closed doors. He was negotiating here, in front of them, with their ears as witnesses. Very well, Victoria said. Let us begin. Jonathan opened his laptop again, the glow of charts and graphs reflected in his eyes. He spoke evenly, his words deliberate. The first condition is documentation. Every incident of bias, large or small, must be logged at the corporate level, not hidden, not dismissed, tracked and reviewed. Victoria did not hesitate, approved, effective immediately. Whispers rose across the cabin. The passengers glanced at one another, real change spoken into existence mid-flight. Jonathan continued. Second, mandatory monthly training, not annual workshops. Consistent, measurable, enforceable, with consequences for failure. Done, Victoria replied, her voice clipped. Monthly, with competency assessments, no exceptions. Melissa Carter flinched in her jump seat. Her pale face turned toward the floor. She knew those words were aimed at her as much as anyone. Jonathan's voice grew firmer. Third, accountability for leadership. Executive bonuses tied directly to inclusion scores. If discrimination rises, compensation falls. Accountability must flow upward. There was a pause on the line. A CEO knew what that meant, angry vice presidents, resistant managers, but Victoria Hale was no coward. Agreed, she said, metrics tied to bonuses. I will draft the framework myself. The passengers murmured again. A businessman in 5A shook his head in disbelief. He's rewriting corporate pay scales at 30,000 feet. Jonathan's gaze never wavered. Fourth, a passenger dignity app. Real-time reporting of discrimination, automatically escalated to headquarters and legal review within 24 hours. Approved, Victoria said quickly. We will begin development this week. A woman in row 4 gasped audibly. That would have saved my son 2 years ago. She whispered to no one in particular. Her words hung in the cabin, unshakable testimony. Jonathan pressed forward. Fifth, financial commitment. $100,000 annually to organizations advancing transportation equity, not as a one-time apology, as an ongoing responsibility. Yes, Victoria confirmed. Recurring donation, written into our budget. He let that sink in before moving to the next. Sixth, contract clauses. Anti-discrimination terms written into every corporate agreement. If bias is proven, clients may terminate without penalty. This time, the pause was longer. The legal implications were enormous. But again, her voice came back firm. Agreed. It will be unprecedented, but it will be binding. The passengers shifted in their seats. Wide-eyed, they understood how massive this was. Jonathan lowered his tone slightly, his voice almost soft. Finally, transparency. Quarterly public reporting of discrimination statistics, published alongside safety data. Let the world see. Victoria inhaled sharply. Then she exhaled. Yes, full transparency, public, quarterly, it will be done. The cabin erupted in whispers. Phones lit up, messages flying across networks. The passengers understood they were present for something historic. This was no longer about one seat or one man. It was about an industry being reshaped in real time. Jonathan leaned back, closing his laptop with quiet finality. Then it is settled. Those are the terms. Without them, Williams Global Holdings will reconsider our renewal. He did not need to say the number again. $127 million hung in the air like an invisible weight. Victoria's voice softened, carrying both respect and resignation. Jonathan, you will have signed commitments before this plane lands. Good, Jonathan replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle, because this was never about me. It was about every passenger who sits down and wonders if they will be questioned simply for existing. Melissa looked up then, tears pooling in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Jonathan turned his gaze briefly toward her, not with anger, but with something heavier expectation. The cabin fell silent again as the call ended. Phones glowed with breaking alerts. The business traveler in 2C updated his thread. Passenger forced to prove dignity. Negotiates corporate reform live on a flight. This is bigger than one seat. This is a turning point. Jonathan lifted his empty cup once more, setting it aside with finality. He adjusted his tie. Calm as ever. Inside, though, he felt the quiet thrum of victory. Not the petty triumph of revenge, but the deeper satisfaction of transformation. He had turned humiliation into negotiation. He had turned silence into power. And, at 30,000 feet, with the world listening, he had begun the work of rewriting what dignity would mean in the skies. The engines hummed as the aircraft finally began to taxi. But inside the cabin, no one was thinking about takeoff. What had unfolded was too raw, too heavy. Passengers sat in silence, their faces reflecting a mix of awe, discomfort, and quiet reflection. It felt as though they were no longer on a flight but inside the pages of history. Jonathan Reed sat upright in 1A, his laptop closed, his phone resting on the tray table. He did not look triumphant. There was no grin of victory, no boast. His expression was calm, almost meditative, as though the storm that had surrounded him had never touched his skin. But inside, his thoughts churned. He thought of his wife's last message. Love you. He thought of his children, who would one day hear this story and ask their father why it happened. He thought of the countless employees under his leadership, traveling the same skies, facing moments like this in smaller, quieter forms, often without witnesses. The responsibility weighed heavier than the Rolex on his wrist. Melissa Carter remained in her jump seat, her posture deflated. The crisp lines of her uniform seemed wilted now. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, her face pale. She had always believed herself efficient, professional, firm, but tonight her certainty had shattered. She saw clearly that her actions, guided by assumptions and wrapped in the armor of policy, had humiliated a man whose dignity required no defense. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but she fought them back, ashamed to let them fall in front of passengers. She could not escape the sound of Victoria Hale's voice replaying in her ears, cutting through her justifications with surgical precision. Suspended without pay, pending investigation, her career, her reputation, her future all dangling by a thread she had frayed with her own hands. Officer Daniel Lopez shifted uncomfortably in the aisle, unable to retreat, yet unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. He had worn his uniform with pride, the authority of law and order. But tonight he felt exposed, stripped of certainty. He had nearly put hands on a man whose only crime was remaining seated. His radio crackled softly at his side, but he ignored it. Every sound seemed amplified now, every vibration a reminder of his complicity. Claire Summers, the gate agent, stared down at her tablet. The glow of the screen felt mocking now, the rows of data a hollow defense. She had relied on it as truth, ignoring the proof held right before her eyes, the boarding pass, the email, the calm man who had shown them both again and again. She wondered how many other times she had trusted the system more than the person, and how many times she had been wrong. Greg Thompson, the businessman in 3C, sat rigid in his seat, his phone heavy in his hand. The device that had once felt like power now felt like a mirror reflecting his arrogance. He had smirked, recorded, announced to the world that Jonathan was cheating the system. He had mocked him, spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear, certain of his own rightness. Now, as he scrolled through the videos he had captured, shame spread across his face. His own voice echoed back at him, dripping with prejudice. He tried to delete them. His finger hovered over the trash icon, but it was too late. Copies had already been uploaded, shared, mirrored across platforms. His words would live on, not as evidence of order, but as proof of ignorance. His career, his network, his reputation, fragile in ways he had never imagined, now rested in the hands of strangers who had witnessed his worst self. The older woman in row 6, the one who had clutched her pearls earlier, sat quietly now, her hands folded in her lap. She whispered to her husband, her voice breaking. I judged him too quickly. I saw a man I thought did not belong, and I said, rules are rules. I was wrong. Her husband nodded silently. Shame etched into the lines of his face. The teenager, Ava Johnson, had tucked her dead phone into her bag, but she could not stop replaying what she had witnessed. She knew instinctively that her stream had changed something. Thousands had watched. Thousands more would watch later. She felt the weight of it on her young shoulders. At 16, she had stumbled into history. She had documented not just humiliation, but transformation. And she understood her role in a way that thrilled and frightened her at once. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. He could still feel the tension of the confrontation lingering in his body. The memory of every time they had called him non-compliant, every time his proof had been ignored. He had carried the storm with stillness, but stillness was not emptiness. It took strength, and the strength had cost him. But he also knew the cost had been worth it. The silence, the patience, the refusal to erupt, all of it had turned humiliation into leverage, and leverage had become change. The business traveler in 2C glanced up from his laptop, where his Twitter thread had gone viral. His posts were being shared by journalists, by activists, by ordinary people stunned at what they had read. He looked across the aisle at Jonathan, admiration clear in his eyes. He raised his voice just enough for others to hear. Mr. Reed, thank you. Thank you for holding your ground. Jonathan inclined his head slightly, his expression unchanged. Dignity is not a favor. It is a right. All I did was sit where I belonged. The man nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The captain's voice came over the intercom then, measured but tinged with strain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain O'Connor. We apologize for the delay. We are now cleared for departure. Please fasten your seat belts. Thank you for your patience. His words felt hollow. The passengers were not thinking of patience. They were thinking of dignity, of justice, of the weight of silence turned into power. As the plane began to roll, Jonathan adjusted his tie and folded his hands again. He thought of the call that would come later that night, the signed documents that would arrive before the flight even landed. He thought of the policies, the training, the transparency that would follow. But he also thought of Melissa, of Lopez, of Greg, people broken not by his words but by their own assumptions. He did not feel triumph over them. He felt something heavier, a responsibility to ensure that their mistakes became lessons, not simply scars. The engines roared as the plane lifted off, pressing passengers back into their seats. Jonathan kept his gaze forward, the city lights falling away beneath them. He knew that what had begun as humiliation had become transformation. But transformation was not finished. It was only beginning. As the aircraft leveled high above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed further, casting the passengers in a quiet glow. The roar of engines was steady, almost soothing, but inside every mind the confrontation still played on repeat. No one reached for movies. No one pulled out headphones. Instead, the passengers sat in silence, carrying the weight of what they had just seen. Jonathan Reed sat with his eyes half closed, his breathing calm, his hands resting lightly on the armrests. His phone buzzed softly, and he glanced down. An email notification glowed across the screen. From Victoria Hale. Subject: immediate action. Attached signed commitments. He opened it with steady hands. The legal language was exact. The commitments precise. Documentation of bias incidents, monthly training, executive accountability, passenger dignity app, financial commitment, contract clauses, transparency, all listed, all signed, all binding, delivered before the plane even touched down. Jonathan read the words slowly, letting each line sink into him. He had demanded systemic change, and it had been granted. This was not just apology, not just promises. This was transformation, written in ink and backed by law. The business traveler in 2C peeked across the aisle. Curious. He caught the glimpse of the document on Jonathan's screen and shook his head in awe. He did it, the man whispered under his breath. He actually did it. Melissa Carter shifted in her jump seat, her eyes darting toward Jonathan. She had not spoken since the suspension order. Now, with the plane steady in the sky, she found her courage again. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. Mr. Reed. Jonathan turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Her throat was tight, her eyes wet with unfallen tears. I thought I was enforcing policy, but I see now that I was enforcing assumptions. I humiliated you, and I'm so sorry. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. He could see the shame in her posture, the weight pressing down on her shoulders. At last, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. Then do the work. Learn, grow. That is the only apology that matters. Melissa nodded quickly, swallowing hard. I will. I promise I will. Officer Lopez remained standing awkwardly nearby. He wanted to say something, but words failed him. He looked down at his uniform, at the radio clipped to his belt, and wondered how much authority mattered if it was used unjustly. Greg Thompson still sat stiffly in 3C, his phone on his lap. He had not dared to live stream since the CEO's call. Shame burned in his face every time he replayed his own words. Finally, as the plane cut across the night sky, he turned slightly toward Jonathan. His voice was low, stripped of arrogance. Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology, too. I assumed things I had no right to assume. I mocked you. I recorded you as though you were a criminal. I was wrong. Jonathan's gaze met his, calm as ever. Awareness is the first step. What matters is what you do with it. Greg nodded faintly. His hands shook as he set the phone face down on the tray table. The hours passed quietly. Some passengers drifted into uneasy sleep. Others typed furiously, their posts spreading across social media, amplifying the story further. The older woman in row 6 prayed silently, asking forgiveness for her quick judgment. Ava Johnson dozed lightly, her dead phone still clutched in her hand. dreaming of the live stream that had changed her life. At last. The captain's voice broke through the quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts. We will be landing shortly." The passengers stirred, seatbelts clicked, bags shifted, but the air in the cabin still carried gravity. They knew they were landing not just from one flight, but from something larger. As the wheels touched the runway, a soft cheer rose in the cabin, more relief than celebration. The plane slowed, the engines reversed, and the hum of arrival filled the air. Jonathan gathered his things slowly, his movements deliberate. He slid his laptop back into his leather briefcase, closed his phone case, adjusted his tie. Around him, passengers stole glances, their eyes filled with respect. They knew they had witnessed something historic. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers began to stand. Melissa rose carefully, her hands still trembling. She stepped toward Jonathan, her voice steadying for the first time. "Mr. Reed, whatever happens with my job, I will carry this lesson. You have my word." Jonathan looked at her, his expression still soft but firm. "Make sure your word becomes action." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. Officer Lopez stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, I need to do better. I see that now." Jonathan met his gaze and offered a single nod. "Then do better." Greg Thompson waited until the aisle cleared before approaching. He carried no smirk now, no bravado. His voice was almost broken. "If you're willing, I'd like to learn. From you, from what I saw tonight, I was blind." Jonathan adjusted his briefcase strap. "Then open your eyes. That is where it starts." Greg nodded, humbled. The passengers filed out, some pausing to nod or whisper thanks to Jonathan. The business traveler in 2C clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "The world needs more of what you did tonight." Jonathan did not answer. He simply walked forward, calm, collected. His steps steady down the jet bridge. Outside, the terminal lights glowed. His phone buzzed again with another email. Signed agreements had been distributed to the board of directors. Implementation was already underway. He had not waited for the world to change. He had forced it to. Weeks later, the results began to show. Aerovista Airlines launched its Passenger Dignity app, allowing real-time reporting. Monthly training rolled out to thousands of employees. Executive bonuses were tied to bias metrics, shaking the upper floors of the corporation. Transparency reports were published on the website, shocking the public with raw numbers but also proven commitment. The annual donation went out to equity organizations across the country. Melissa Carter completed her training and returned to work, now speaking openly about her mistake. She became one of the program's strongest advocates, warning new hires about the danger of assumptions. Officer Lopez transferred to a new role in customer relations, helping design de-escalation strategies for conflicts. Claire Summers joined a task force on system accountability, determined never to trust a tablet over a human again. Greg Thompson enrolled in bias training at his firm and later became a diversity advocate. He referenced Flight 982 in speeches, acknowledging how his arrogance had been broken and rebuilt. Ava Johnson launched a career in journalism, her footage used in news outlets and documentaries. The Business Traveler in 2C published an article that became a case study in corporate responsibility. For Aerovista, the changes brought transformation. Customer satisfaction soared, corporate contracts renewed, stock prices climbed, Competitors scrambled to catch up, implementing similar reforms. Industry standards shifted, all traced back to one night, one man, one flight. Jonathan Reed never boasted about the incident. When asked later, he always replied with the same words. The most powerful weapon is not anger, it is patience, combined with leverage. Change happens when consequences align with values. He had lived those words on Flight 982, and because of them, the skies became just a little more just, a little more human. What began as humiliation ended as transformation. Jonathan Reed showed the world that dignity is not granted by others, it is owned from within. He reminded us that patience and quiet strength can sometimes be the most powerful weapons against prejudice, and he proved that one calm voice can move an entire corporation to its knees and force it to change. But beyond corporate contracts and policies, this story is about something deeper. It is about every person who has ever been told they do not belong, every passenger who has felt unseen, every child who will grow up watching how society decides who is worthy of respect. Discrimination does not just wound individuals, it poisons systems. Yet, when confronted with courage and strategy, it can be dismantled. That is the legacy of Flight 982. So, as you leave this story, carry with you a reminder: silence can be broken, assumptions can be challenged, and dignity is not negotiable. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of truth, justice, and transformation. The skies are changing, but only if we keep telling these stories together.